I have great hope for AI being incorporated in this industry, but it seems like right now we do not yet have a strong database, a strong model base for the AEC, architecture, engineering, construction industry yet. And it takes maybe major companies' effort and capital investment to train those models before we're able to use them effectively. So talking about how we were translating from paper to maybe CAD a couple decades ago, and then CAD to BIM. Right now, I feel like consultants and architects are working simultaneously on the BIM cloud model, but we're not optimizing anything yet. We're basically drawing from 2D to 3D on the 3D software synchronously. It's not significantly different from drawing on paper, it's just faster. And I feel like the next step, if major corporations are able to push the model for the AEC industry with significantly trained database, then there is a lot of hope in optimizing our existing workflow.
Before we go into the podcast, if you could just go and rate this show on whichever platform you're listening to it, it makes a huge difference to the podcast, the amazing conversations we get to have, and the incredible guests we're able to get on the podcast. So it's probably not something you would think about, but if you could just go rate the show, follow it, or share an episode, it does make a huge difference to the show. Thank you so much. In a world increasingly facing the challenges of climate change, with the Building Green podcast, we will dive deep into the intersection of architecture, design, urbanism, and environmental responsibility. I'm Ladina Schipf, your host. I've been an architect and building site manager for the past 10 years. During my studies at ETH in Switzerland, as well as in my working environment, I've had many touchpoints with sustainability, like many of you, I guess. I've also learned to question what I've been told, which is why I decided to go deeper into the topic and uncover what sustainability actually means. My mission is to highlight the transformative power of sustainable architecture, not just as a practice, but as a catalyst for broader societal change. Subscribe for more of our content and enjoy the show. She was 10 years old when an earthquake shook the building around her. Walls cracked, windows shattered, and 80,000 people lost their lives. That moment changed everything. Now Ethnie Xu is designing the buildings of the future, structures that don't fight nature but survive it. With an architecture degree and an MBA from Yale, she's worked in real estate, robotics, and sustainable design, proving that beautiful buildings can also be smart investments. With almost 10K followers on YouTube, she's bringing architecture and real estate insights to a global audience. From AI-driven design to modular construction, she's turning bold ideas into reality. And today she's here to share them. Thank you very much, Ethnie, for joining me today on Building Green. I'm super excited to be talking to you. Let's start from the beginning. Can you share a bit about your journey, how you got into architecture, sustainability, your MBA?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, Ladina. It's a pleasure to be here and share my experience. So a little bit about me. I am a Chinese Kiwi. I grew up in New Zealand. And before coming to the States, I had the opportunity to work in the architecture industry, as well as working for a star architect, a robotics startup involved in the construction industry, and a little bit of the development side, as well as a little bit of teaching. So that's my background, in kind of dabbled into a few different industries around the AEC broader field. And I completed a Master of Architecture and an MBA at Yale, a combined degree, which is a bit of a niche industry that people don't typically get into, but I had a great time, and I'm interested in continuing working in the sustainable building development sector to push forward a better future environment, honestly, just for all of us. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm working in New York City as an architectural designer at the moment.
That's so cool. And you did both an MBA and a master's in architecture at Yale. And I don't know if you know this, but I also have a master's in architecture and an MBA.
Not many of us do it, but I think it's a great combination of skill sets. I highly recommend it.
What made you want to combine business and architecture?
I'm not sure if you heard of the saying, but I heard someone say that for every finance problem in real estate, there is a design solution. and vice versa.
Love it. I never heard about that.
Really? Yeah, I strongly believe in it, and I think it's true. And I think we need more people that bridge the connection to help push things forward.
So you lived and studied all over the world, New Zealand, Australia, China, and the US. That's a super wild mix of cultures. How do you think all of those experiences shaped how you approach architecture and real estate?
Throughout my different time, also throughout different ages, I primarily grew up in New Zealand and China, and I guess I can talk about a few significant experiences that shaped my understanding of the field before I even entered this field. As a child, I have experienced several earthquakes throughout my life. There's a significant one in Christchurch, which I've heard of in New Zealand, but I wasn't in the city. But there was also a 2008 major earthquake in China, in which I was literally in the major city next to the center of the earthquake, visiting my grandparents when it happened.
Did you feel it?
I felt everything. The building was shaking, the windows were cracking, walls were cracking as well, and things were falling down. And that earthquake, very unfortunately, took the lives of, I believe, 80,000 people in the villages and the rural areas where it happened. And as a child, I was 10 years old, and my parents took me to help out. We drove throughout the mountains, and we drove to the place where it happened, in which I saw the debris, I saw all the buildings, and I think that left a very strong impression in my heart as a little girl, that I noticed that architecture is not just beautiful, it's not just the city's skyscrapers I see, it's not just the beautiful houses I grew up with in New Zealand. It can kill people, and there's nothing we can do in front of the mother nature. We can only adapt, we can only compromise and work around with it. But if we don't do it correctly, it will kill us. So I think that was a belief I've always had when I was young, and and having known that I wanted to go into the architecture industry, I've always had this belief in my head that we cannot conquer over nature, and we have to learn and do everything we can to optimize our own situations around it.
And that's what made you want to go deeper into sustainable construction and resilience, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And just a little bit more on that topic, I feel like the past year has been extremely humbling for all of us, starting with the hurricane in Florida at the end of the year, as well as the very unfortunate fire in LA that's, I believe, still happening right now, and it's truly tragic. But I think those series of events that continue to happen, they continue to remind us how small we are as humans and how important it is for us to build our structures strategically so that we survive alongside with nature instead of trying to fight against it.
That is so true. We have to fight with it and not against it. I'm actually wondering, I don't know if you know anything about it, but I'm wondering, now that a huge part of LA is destroyed, if there are any plans they are making right now about building from the ground up in a more resilient way. And I'm not just talking about more resilient structures, but maybe also in terms of the urbanism they are going to allow from now on. Do you know anything about that?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in urbanism or landscape design, but last week I had the opportunity to attend the ULI New York event, and for some of the panels, I heard that reconstructing LA is not just an urban design problem, but also an insurance industry problem, because they have never faced anything so dramatic, so significant like that before. And it really takes collaboration across government, urban planners, insurance companies, together to push forward a more resilient plan in the future. That's not just a simple takeaway saying like, we will not build buildings near the mountains anymore. That linear solution will not work. It needs to be a collaboration across the different disciplines. That's what I heard. And yeah, so that's, I guess, a short answer, but I myself is very curious about what's going to happen with all the displaced people, as well as there are many high risk areas that we're building buildings on that we cannot avoid it because of the urban sprawl. So I can't think of any better ways to do it. We can either build upwards vertically, or we have to expand.
Yeah, but we can build our structures in a more resilient way. And every chaos, as unfortunate as it is, it's a huge opportunity to do it better now. And even though we have to react super fast because there's so many people without homes right now and they want their homes back as soon as possible, but still we need to take a moment to kind of plan ahead and think how we can build in the most resilient way possible.
That's absolutely true. I completely agree. And I feel like we're still in the midst of it and people are still reacting to it rather than jumping into solutions right now.
So, Ethnie, let's talk about sustainability. Sustainable design is such a buzzword these days, but in reality, making buildings truly sustainable is super complex. As someone who's early in your career, how do you see the role of young architects and designers in pushing sustainability forward?
Absolutely. Like you said, it's difficult. It is a broad, almost vague umbrella term that's overused right now. And I feel like, in my opinion, the implementation is far behind compared to the awareness that we have right now. And I think young people, whether you're an independent designer or whether you're working for a larger organization, there's definitely many ways that you can push forward this agenda. And on top of my head, I can think of two primary methods. I think the first one is technology, and the second one is qualifications. On the technology front, forgive me, but most young people tend to be more invested in the newer softwares that's involved in the architecture industry. I'm not saying more senior members are not interested, but I'm just saying this is a trend that I've observed. And there are many tools that came up in the recent years. Like, for example, I myself use Cove tool, and that's like I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it's a very effective software that you can just put in your Revit or Rhino model into the software, and it generates a sustainable report for you in which you can refine your design out of it and push forward.
What metrics does it show you?
So it uses a 3D analysis in which it accurately predicts the coordinations of your site. So you enter the location of your site, and it formulates the sun path, the weather prediction, precipitation prediction, snow prediction, etc., to give you an analysis of like how much sunlight are you going to have in every single room and things like that.
Do you adapt the passive architecture, let's say, according to the report you get? Okay, that's cool.
Exactly. So we can look at the report and see like where we're lacking and then modify your design based on the outcome. So you can just keep feeding it into the model, and then it will keep giving you feedback. So you can just have this easy process. And I think some tools like this that's only been developed in the past 5 to 10 years, I believe, make what's traditionally a harder task a lot easier. And I think as young people in the office, young people in the industry, you can push forward by presenting these results to other people that might not be familiar with this, and let them see how fast, let them see how effective this can be. And people, when they see results, they adapt. I think when you're just talking about concepts, it's very hard to persuade anyone. It's hard to persuade your managers, hard to persuade your clients. But when they see outcomes, that's when you don't even need to persuade. And I think that's how technology is very helpful at the moment. And if you're new to the industry, I also think it would be very helpful to just get yourself prepared by studying some of the qualifications, like the big ones, including LEED AP or the WELL programs. They give you very strong foundational knowledge on what to do from an environmental perspective. And they're also highly valued by clients and by employers nowadays. So I think those could be beneficial for both yourself and your organization.
That's a very good point you're making. I think what I see as well with speaking to different people is that there's always like we're moving towards a much more data-based decision
Yes.
or way of making decisions rather than, I mean, I don't know how it was before me. I started designing on computers, but people that were like hand drawing, it's just like, yeah, like this more than that. Maybe you would make like a model and see like
Exactly.
the comfort maybe was easier to understand with a hand model, let's say, or a physical model. But like all these more important, more sustainable decisions need to be made based on data analysis.
Absolutely. I also agree with you. I understand the charm of physical model and hand drawing. I believe they're beautiful for its time, but right now we're just gifted with such more effective data-driven tools. And I think it's a blessing that we should make use of.
Definitely. And do you see now that you're working, do you see kind of resistance to that change, or are they open to you bringing in your ways of doing stuff?
Personally, I haven't encountered too much resistance in pushing this method, and I don't see it as a change anymore. I feel like nowadays, whenever we attend conferences or lectures or industry talks, I feel like most people are aware that this is not a trend, but I guess this is a trend that they can't avoid. I think most people are on board with it, and most people do appreciate it, whether they are familiar with it or not, which is great.
And of course, universities are shaping the next generation of architects and designers. But do you think they're doing enough when it comes to teaching sustainabilities, or what's missing and how could they better prepare their students?
Right. That's a great question. Again, I'm only speaking from my experience. I studied architecture at Yale as well as Sydney University in Australia. And from my personal experience, I feel like the universities are doing enough on the education and awareness aspect, but perhaps not so much on the implementation side, just from my personal experience. I feel like many of the architecture education nowadays is very much embedded in awareness building and social problem solving instead of what is the industry standard, international building code, etc., that's applied in workplace right now, that's applied on the construction side. I understand it's difficult to teach that part because it requires some level of work experience on site and some level of understanding of how the contractors and the construction industry work. But from my experience, I feel like upon graduating from architecture school, had I had a lot of ambition on pushing sustainability agendas, but I didn't have enough real life implementation tools that allow me to effectively communicate with consultants and communicate with contractors about the reasoning behind it and how we could apply to our individual projects, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's actually something I also think they could kind of push a bit more.
Absolutely. And it's difficult. There's been a huge conversation on how the architecture industry education has been disconnected from the industry for a long time now. And I think many institutions are working on that. So
And so you have worked in both in real estate investment and affordable housing, right?
yes.
Do you think, I mean, for those both of those areas, cost is a huge factor. Do you think sustainability and affordability can realistically go hand in hand?
I feel like there's a big myth that sustainable architecture is expensive. That's the myth that I would like to debunker. I feel like it doesn't have to be. Maybe the upfront cost may be higher, but when we talk about life cycle analysis of the building, the energy saving aspect, the maintenance saving aspect, I think they should all be encountered and incorporated into the financial model when people are doing analysis on those types of developments. So that takes a lot of nuances, but I think it's possible. However, on the affordable housing side, I'm sure everyone's aware that we are in a huge housing crisis in the United States. and in other parts of the world too. I think it's very difficult when you're valuing people's rights to housing with sustainability and the cost associated with the upfront costs. When people are already having trouble building anything, it's very hard for them to ask them to build better, build more sustainable. I think it's just a very difficult situation in itself and adding more complex layers to it. However, again, I think to your point, I think knowing that sustainability does reduce costs in the long term, I think it's a professional's responsibilities to educate people, to educate their clients, to showcase the safety, the cost saving aspects of those. And it's just extra task, I believe, that's for the better. And people hopefully should choose to take that route.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So if you had full control over a new real estate project, no budget restrictions.
Oh, wow.
What's one sustainable feature you'd love to include that you think isn't being used enough today?
I think something that I'm personally very interested in is modular architecture or modular offsite production of structures. I understand they do not have a great reputation when it comes to the aesthetics, when it comes to the actual execution, but I personally believe that with the new AI technologies, there's the opportunity to bring another level of complexity to the modular offsite design. And they bring so much benefits because you limit the construction that occurs on site, which it saves a lot of carbon energy because you're producing in-house. And it also saves a lot of labor costs, which is like, I believe 80% of the construction cost is coming from labor in some cases. So that is something I would love to work with and push forward, which is sustainable, beautiful, offsite produced modular architecture that takes way shorter time to construct and can bring, again, features that are not normally feasible to be produced on site.
If you talk about modular, I think a lot of people have like containers in mind, some kind of container. What's like, do you have some examples for an additional complexity that you were talking about that you can add through AI?
I think the consensus is that everyone have complex reactions towards the container houses, which I understand. And I'm personally not a big fan when it's executed in that way. But I think when we break away from that type of thinking, offsite modular construction is not just stacking boxes, stacking Lego together. We can pre-manufacture wall complexes, bathrooms, kitchen units, as well as beautiful facade panels that can just connect with each other and lock in shape. And prior to the AI age, we can only do it in a Lego format. But right now, if we have the gift of technology, if we have the digital BIM models in hand, we're actually able to connect that with the robotic system that we're going to produce it from and have more customized shapes and able to have like better intricacies that I guess mimic real architecture instead of just stacking boxes using this technology.
What are other cool ways that you think AI can actually change the way we design?
I have great hope for AI being incorporated in this industry. However, I think it's taking its time because we all know that ChatGPT, etc., has been doing a great job in the other aspects of work. But it seems like right now we do not yet have a strong database, a strong model base for the AEC, architecture, engineering, construction industry yet. And it takes maybe major companies' effort and capital investment to train those models before we're able to use them effectively. As in, like, we just simply don't have strong models trained for this industry yet. And I think if big companies or if very talented individuals are willing to push those forward from like software engineers' perspective, there are a lot of hope in optimizing our existing workflow. So talking about how we were translating from paper to maybe CAD a couple of decades ago, and then CAD to BIM. And we honestly in my opinion, haven't fully mastered BIM yet. It was like an explorative decade where everyone's trying to like experiment with parametrics, experiment with BIM 360 cloud model. And it's working, but not holistically yet. And I feel like the next step, if major corporations are able to push the model for the AEC industry with significantly trained database, then there's a lot of hope in optimizing our existing workflow. Options could be like, right now, I feel like consultants and architects are working simultaneously on the BIM cloud model, but we're not optimizing anything yet. We're basically drawing 3D, drawing from 2D to 3D on the 3D software synchronously, but it's not significantly different from drawing on paper. It's just faster. That's my opinion.
How are you using AI right now? Are you, for example, feeding ChatGPT your Cove tool report and asking him to make some suggestions? Or how are you using AI right now?
I think right now we are still in the experimenting stage with AI. Less about the design and structure. I feel like right now AI is more widely applied for visualization, which is the more 2D, I guess like the 2D, supposedly easier graphical aspect of architecture. There are softwares like, for example, D5 Render that has AI optimization for background and for overall ambience generation, which is like honestly so amazing. Like it saves so much time from photoshopping. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of those tools, as well as some of the interior design auto generation, are very much 2D focused and visualization focused right now. And what I hope to see in the future is that we move away from that aspect and go into the actual optimization of design.
I like that point of view, really. And I want to see what your thought is about that. But combining architecture and business, I think a lot of architects or designers focus on visualizing something beautiful and spending hours on visualizing something beautiful to sell the beautiful idea. But if we can use AI to visualize a strong idea, let's say your sustainable modular buildings that you were talking about, and let's say a few years ago, your client would have said, I'm not going to build a container house. And now if you, with the help of AI, if you can design it beautifully, then maybe you convince your client to build something more sustainable.
That's 100% true. And that's what's amazing about that too. And a fun fact, I feel like the AI image generation is so effective now that a few years ago at Yale, they had to put a ban on students using them, because traditionally students would have to render their final projects, but now they can just feed it in and ask, please render 10 images for my final project, and they will come out beautiful. The schools shouldn't limit students from exploring new tools, but they felt the need to put a ban on that. So I just thought that was interesting.
That's super interesting. It's actually, they should rather grow with the students, and instead of asking you to produce, I mean, when we were studying and we had to render, we had to hand in like 4 big renderings because people knew that would take us like 2 weeks to create them. So They could not ask for more. So maybe now schools have to adapt as well and say, okay, use those tools, but give me something else to sell me the project.
Right. That's a good take as well. Yeah. Maybe that was a few years ago again. Maybe things have changed, and we never know. Things change every couple of years now with this trends growing. So
if you're enjoying the show, I have a small favor to ask that would mean the world to me. By rating and sharing the podcast, you're helping us grow and spreading our mission of making sustainability really desirable and cool to a wider audience. Besides of that, imagine impressing your colleagues with the latest insights on sustainable architecture. So make sure you follow the podcast and become the most informed in the room. Thank you so much for your support. So you got both an MBA and an architecture degree, which means you see the industry from 2 very different angles. Do you feel like those two mindsets, business and design, clash? Like, is there ever a moment where the architect in you wants to push for creativity, but the business side of you says, no, we're not going to do that?
From my perspective, no, I don't think it has clashed in my head, at least, at all. If any, I think they go hand in hand. But that's just my personal take because I chose to study these two very different disciplines to enhance my own experience. But however, I guess talking about people, other people from these two different disciplines, I believe I'm sometimes interacting with people from different perspectives. Like, for example, in real estate development, we are working with team members who have very great, strong knowledge on how to build buildings, how to financially make them work, but know very little about what it takes to design a building. And on the other hand, from the architect side, we have amazingly talented architects who knew how to make the best buildings, but perhaps lacked the understanding of what financed this project and what are the intricacies that led to what we can do and what we cannot do from the financial constraints perspective. And I think without effective communication, those two perspectives and those two aspects may clash. But however, I think they are honestly, we have the same goal, which is to build amazing environments for our users. And as long as your final goal is aligned, I don't think there's anything that can be resolved through communication. And perhaps I hope that's where people like you and I come in and help bridge that gap, hopefully.
I think it goes back to what you said earlier, optimization. Like architecture can be, or real estate can be optimized by better communication. Like if architects understand the real estate developer's needs or his desires or his ideal outcome, then they can design, or even not even design, but just communicate the value of their project in a different way.
Absolutely. 100%, 100%.
So how do you think, what tip would you give architects who want to break into real estate development?
I think maybe a combination of learning and networking. If you're more serious about it, there are great programs, schools that you can go to that have real estate development courses like Harvard, MIT, and NYU, I believe. I'm just talking about East Coast because that's where I am situated in. But if I understand most people don't have the 2 years to study an entirely new degree. And I think there are also very helpful online courses that, for example, NYU and Cornell offers. And even if you just attend conferences and like watch podcasts on LinkedIn, on YouTube, like that's going to be a great help if you're just trying to understand what's going on in the real estate world. Like I myself attend the ULI conferences frequently, as well as I do also follow some YouTubers that give lectures on real estate. There's one channel called Break-in CRE, which is commercial real estate. That's very helpful. It gives you short lessons on the different concepts that will help to frame your understanding. So I think those are initiatives that you can take on yourself to learn, but also attending local conferences, local events help you to meet other people that are either way deeper in the industry or maybe like you, like trying to learn, trying to get in. And I think by attending those events, it's very helpful for you to meet people, to like listen to their different experiences. And it really helps you to build your own personal and professional network for the future. And it's going to take a little time. It's not going to be a 2 weeks short fast track course. It might take a few years to understand, to find your own place. Which area are you interested in? Are you a designer? Are you a salesperson? Are you a finance guy or girl? Sorry. But in that case, I think it's take your time, figure out what you want to do, what brings you joy, and just learn and network.
That's definitely a good advice. So tell me more about the UAL conference you just attended this week, I think. What are some of the the most exciting advancements you saw there?
So at the ULI conference I went to, it was at NYU Stern in the past week. It was amazing because it was focused on 2025 trends in real estate, in which many people, at least in the US, are feeling nervous about, because over the past few years, we've had the industry was not going strong and we were still coming back from the post-pandemic. People are figuring out how some of the sectors are going to play, like offices. Are people going to leave offices completely, or are people still going to go back slowly after the pandemic? And I think a lot of the conversations are framed around how people's lives tend to have gone back to normal instead of what people predicted during the pandemic. People predicting that retail is going to die down, office is going to die down. But in the past years, we've seen climbing trends in those spaces. So it's been very exciting to hear that those are coming back. But on the other aspect, there were conversations that touched on New York specifically, on how most of the buildings are aging significantly. And I believe it's not unique to New York, across the US too. And how do we utilize those 100-year-old buildings when their functions no longer meet our current needs? Demolishing all of them is going to be incredibly not sustainable. It's going to cause incredible destructions. And I think the consensus is that we need to find a way to effectively implement adaptive reuse programs to those buildings, like office to residential, et cetera, for example, to help solve our housing crisis that we're currently facing. And I think that was a very exciting conversation for me, because I agree that living in a city like New York, building more might not be the solution. But how do we change our existing buildings and turn them into amazingly sustainable, beautiful, contemporary structure? I think that is the real problem. And that comes with great challenges too.
That's super cool, these two takeouts. Now, I'm wondering if you talked about this, but during the pandemic, there was like this worry of all these big offices in the city emptying and like people moving outside of the city. Like this has been like a trend that's been going on forever. People moving out of cities, people moving back in. So there were a lot of expectations maybe of people, everybody moving out, having a big house with a home office, with a home gym and all that, and having empty offices or even having empty apartments in the city. So that all vanished.
Well, I wouldn't say it all vanished, but I think there's been research is showing like a growing trend that people are not leaving offices as fast as we thought they would be during the pandemic. Especially, I'm sure on the news, we've covered like some big tech companies are pushing 5 days in office starting from this year. So those are definitely like being taken in consideration for those research reports. So we're not sure how that's going to play in the long term yet, because from what I saw on the news, there's been a lot of resistance to going back to the office 5 days a week from the employees' side. So yeah, so not sure, but let's see.
Now, let's talk about cities, and you mentioned the demolishing all old buildings in New York. Imagine also, besides of the sustainable aspect and the cost, the economical cost, what it mean for our society if like the whole cultural heritage is destroyed and we have like all these glass boxes, or I don't know how that would look like.
No idea how that's going to play. And I guess from my experience, not even in the US, but having lived in China, China went through rapid development in the past few decades. And again, it's also going to be left with enormous, tall, old buildings in the next few decades. And like, that's going to be a huge problem for cities like Hong Kong, Beijing, and Shanghai. And I believe that is something that the Chinese architects have to be faced with in the next few decades. They have to find a way to either try to adapt and reuse them, or they have to demolish them. There's no other way. Like buildings have a lifetime, unfortunately, whether we like it or not. And of course, some beautiful cathedrals can survive hundreds of years, but for your daily residential buildings, some of them are just not built in that way. They're not built to withstand that age. And how do we deal with them? Can we recycle the material? Can we recycle the structure? I think those are all problems that we have to be faced with in the future.
Yeah, and I guess it also ties back to how we design now in a very flexible way, because we know things change.
Absolutely. I think right now there's a growing trend in designing for adaptable buildings, which unfortunately wasn't the case when those older buildings were built 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So
now, with your international background, what are some urbanistic characteristics you think could be taken from somewhere else in the world and improve American cities?
Every different city has their own unique solutions to their own social problems. So it's a little difficult to just plug something and dump it on somewhere else. But I think there's definitely commonalities across this in terms of the countries I lived in. I think US and China, in terms of their big mega cities, there's a lot of commonalities, a lot of skyscrapers, very dense urban population. So I think those two, I guess, environments can definitely learn from each other in the sense that, like, for example, public transportation was a huge emphasis in the US, and now it's been adopted to China with the very vast network of underground subway. And I think those are all great aspects that people can learn from each other. And that might not apply to Australia or New Zealand directly just because of the different density scale of the cities. So I think critical regionalism is a concept that I personally like a lot, because I think that respects the culture, respects the way of life of people from specific regions, instead of just applying a concept like modernism and building them everywhere, which is what we've seen in the past. I don't personally agree with that. I think every region should have its own methods of design, and that should incorporate its culture, its history, and its human density, and how the city plans its urban development for the future.
I think mobility is a great keyword you mentioned there. That's going to change a lot in our cities and the sustainable aspect of it.
Absolutely.
So, Ethnie, some people are worried that AI will replace architects, while others think that it's just going to be another tool in our toolkit. Where do you land on that?
The short answer is, I think no. I don't think it will replace our jobs. I think AI would be a tool, because this job, the architecture industry, we are primarily consultants that are solving unique problems for different projects. And that takes human initiative. And I feel like right now AI are very good at doing jobs that takes a lot of data training, that takes a lot of repetitive work, and that could be helpful for some aspects of our jobs. But I think that initial design thinking, that initial initiative, should still be in control of humans. And maybe it will cut some of the tedious work that we had to do in the past that we don't want to do either way, like maybe some of the code analysis, like the fixtures count, the fire sprinklers, egress calculation. I think it would be great that those labor work can be reduced. I don't think that's reducing anyone's job. I think that's saving people's time, if anything. So that's my optimistic take.
Yeah, it's funny. I spoke to a furniture designer a few weeks ago, and he also said, like, actually AI gives us time back so we can focus on the things we really want to focus on, whether that be like optimizing the design to make it more sustainable or more beautiful or whatsoever, or even spending time with your family, going outdoors. It just gives you time back for those things that you really want to do.
That's underrated. And again, I feel like the same conversation was existing when CAD was invented, when BIM was invented. I feel like every time there's been a dramatic shift in the industry, people have this conversation, like, are they going to replace us? And they haven't.
So for young professionals who want to follow in your footsteps and mix architecture with business. What's something you wish you had known earlier that could have kind of fast tracked your career?
Something I wish I knew before was just be more confident in delivering your expertise. I feel like when we come from an industry, we tend to think that, like, for example, when we speak to clients, when we speak to developers, it's important to be confident that you know your expertise the best, even if they might have control over the finance, they might have more understanding of the industry trends. I think it's important for us to be very confident in our knowledge, in the trainings that we received, and able to stand up and speak against ideas and decisions that you don't agree with, because you are hired as an architect, as a consultant, to voice those ideas. You're not hired to just agree with someone else. I think that's very important for young people to understand and to eventually build their career upwards.
And I think something I wanted to say earlier when we were talking about young people in the industry and how they are doing things, I think something you really understood really well is the importance of kind of having reach by building your YouTube channel and just having a voice, even though you're not sure yet how you're going to use it, or it has been a journey that has changed. You start with your architecture projects from student years. Now I'm sure it's going to change. But just like having a platform where you have people looking up to you and listening to you and how you can use that. What are your next goals with your channel?
I started off my YouTube channel just simply hoping to showcase my life, to showcase how people can get into Yale and what we do there. But slowly throughout the, after reading the comments and seeing how the different types of audience I attracted, I felt like it was important to not only showcase that chapter of my life, but also to deliver the journeys I'm going through right now, in which I'm living in New York City. I'm invested in these different types of entrepreneurial paths, as well as very committed to my architecture journey. I think I hope to showcase more contents that involved in what I've learned in this process and what I'm going to continue to learn, like things like, what do architects need to understand about real estate development, or what is the New York real estate space looking like right now for young people or for anyone. I think those are some of the key contents I hope to build in the future, and I will continue making videos.
Love that. What is something that architects need to know about the real estate development of New York, besides of the two things you already mentioned?
I think just to understand the pro forma, understand why clients hired you and what the client's goals are, whether it's short-term or long-term. Because obviously we have the responsibility to push some agendas like sustainability, like building wellness, life safety, but understanding what the client's goals are and help shape that goal, if anything, or either enhance it or help shape it based on our understanding of what's right and wrong. I think that will benefit our clients in ways that they might not have initially envisioned. And that's where the magic comes in. You're delivering packages that they didn't even know they needed. But because of your expertise, you are telling them this is what you're actually doing. I think that would be very important.
I love to ask my guests about their favorite project. Is there any sustainable building or project anywhere in the world that really inspires you?
I think for me, perhaps proximity-wise, the project that comes into my mind is the Central Park building in Sydney, Australia, that's designed by John Novell. And it's a vertical green facade. And it's a significant project because I myself have lived in the building for a summer, and it was just lovely to go inside home and seeing a screen of green in central of Sydney, because it's a very dense populated CBD area. And I feel like because of that one project, it has inspired a nearby development of a plaza, of parks, And I think the magic about it is not just one green building standing up, looking very funky, looking very green. I think it's the magic that it's shaping the surrounding neighborhood into a place where people typically would just walk past, but now you want to stay there. Now people sit there and eat ice cream. Now they hang out with their children, they walk their dogs. I think it's important to realize when you're thinking about, sometimes people think like, what can I do with the city's already looking like a concrete jungle? If I just build one thing, what's that going to do? But it's not that way. If you build one thing, that can inspire a second thing and inspire a third thing. So I think that's why I really like that project.
That's really cool. I didn't know you lived in that project. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I guess also like the climate must be super nice. It kind of cools down a bit, fresh air. That's beautiful.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I was just thinking, because I heard a few bad comments about the Bosco Verticale in Milano, which also has like a lot of greenery. And I think any sustainable project or any project has its bad sides as well. So in the Bosco Verticale, people were criticizing that you need much more concrete to support, like to carry those heavy structures of the plants, and you need a lot of water to water it. But on the other hand, you're kind of showing how important greenery is, and that there are other ways to have more greenery in a city than just in a park.
Yes. Again, it's the compromise we talked about before. Like, if we just had parks, we would just go there. But those are situations where we didn't. So,
and from a development perspective, it's cool that different people are taking different opportunities, even though, everything has its compromise.
Right.
That's really cool. Thank you so much, Ethnie. So if people want to follow your journey and see more of your work, where can they find you?
Right. So I have a YouTube channel called Ethnie Xu Architecture and Real Estate Insights. If you're curious, feel free to follow or watch my videos. And I also have LinkedIn and Instagram accounts in which I post some of my journeys and the work I do on those platforms.
Thank you very much, Ethnie. It's been really cool.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to talk to you about these topics, because I think those conversations need to happen more often.
A huge thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to the podcast to support me and so you don't miss an episode. And while you're there, I'd also be so grateful if you could rate and review us. If you have any guest suggestions or any feedback, you can find me on the socials at @LatinaShip. Thanks.